A black guy named Dree is walking alone at night through a perfectly manicured suburban street. A little sports car pulls up and starts slowly tracking him. Andre gets spooked, says, "Fuck this shit," and changes directions to walk back the way he came briskly. When he turns to see what the car did, he sees it's parked where it was, but the door is open. From out of nowhere, a man in a medieval helmet attacks the black guy and drags his body to the car. Rose shows up to her photographer boyfriend Chris's apartment with pastries and coffee. They're getting ready to go away for the weekend to visit her family, and he's concerned that they don't know she's dating a black guy. She assures him that, while they will likely say some stupid things, they are incredibly progressive. Her dad would have even voted for Obama a third time if he could have. He makes sure he's the only black guy Rose has ever dated. She says he is, but is confident that her parents will be totally cool. On the ride to her parents' home, Chris goes for a cigarette, but Rose takes it and throws it out the window. Her parents would really frown on her dating a smoker. Chris calls his buddy Rod, a TSA agent, and reminds him to take care of his dog and not to feed him human food. Rod busts his balls about going to visit the white folk and says it's a bad idea. He also flirts with Rose a little bit. Chris gets a little jealous and Rose thinks it's sweet. While they're deep in conversation and not entirely paying attention to the road, a deer darts out in front of the car and is hit. They pull over to investigate and call the police. The police show up and ask what they're doing in the area. Rose tells them that they're visiting her family. The officer asks to see Chris's ID, but Rose steps in and says that because he wasn't driving, there's no need for that. The officer lets them go, and Chris tells Rose that it is hot. Chris and Rose arrive at her parents' home. Her dad, Dean Armitage, is an affable neurosurgeon who, yes, would have voted for Obama a third time if he could have. Her mom, Missy, is a strangely cold hypnotherapist. She offers to cure Chris of his nicotine addiction through hypnosis, but he doesn't feel cool with people tooling around in his head. The Armitages also have two on-site black helpers. There's Walter the groundskeeper and Georgina the maid. Dean acknowledges that it looks bad, that two wealthy white people having two helpers who are black. But they were hired to take care of his parents and Dean would have felt bad letting them go. There's definitely something off about both Walter and Georgina. They have a definite stiff Stepford artificial politeness about them. They also both speak using dated vernacular. Dean gives Chris a tour of the house and shows him old family photos. His dad was beaten out by Jesse Owens to compete in the Olympics in front of Hitler. And while that was sad for his dad, it was still great to have Hitler's Aryan idealism proven wrong. He taps on the basement door and says it's closed off due to black mold. There are also pictures of Rose's brother who will be joining them later. He's a surgeon like his dad, but he went through a rough patch. The family gets together for afternoon tea. Missy asks about Chris's parents. His dad left when he was young and his mom was hit by a car when he was 11. Georgina sort of short-circuits while pouring tea and Missy tells her to go lay down and get some rest. The Armitages tell Rose that they're having their big party tomorrow. She's surprised and they remind her that it's the same day every year. Rose's brother Jeremy arrives. He's an aggressively dickish rich kid. That night the family has dinner and a drunk Jeremy starts talking to Chris about MMA fighting. He says that because Chris comes from a hardy stock he'd be a natural. He wants to spar, but Chris says that he has rules about play fighting with drunks. Dean and Missy tell Jeremy that maybe it's time for him to go to bed. Chris and Rose retire to their room where she apologizes for her family and they go to sleep. In the middle of the night, Chris gets up and decides to sneak out for a cigarette. While outside he sees something in the distance charging him. It's Walter. He heads straight for Chris, but makes a sharp turn at the last moment and runs off in another direction. Inside the house, Georgina is staring out a window. It turns out she's looking at her own reflection, not Chris. She adjusts her hair and Chris decides to head back inside. Before Chris can make it back to his room, Missy turns on a light and startles him. She tells him that smoking is a bad habit and offers again to help. He sits down and mocks the notion of hypnotism, unaware of the fact that she's slowly hypnotizing him while using her teaspoon as a focus object. She takes him back to when he was 11 on the night his mom died. She didn't come home from work and he was too scared to do anything about it. He was afraid that if he called the police it would make it real. So he just sat there watching television, nervously digging his nails into his bedposts. Present-day Chris is doing the same thing, digging his nails into the arms of the chair. She tells him to sink and 11-year-old Chris sinks into his bed, while present-day Chris sinks into blackness, seeing himself and Missy far above. His consciousness has left his body, while his body is still paralyzed in his chair. He wakes in the morning and checks his phone. Rod has sent Chris a picture of him pretending to give his dog beer. His battery is low, so he plugs it in. Chris tells Rose that he thinks maybe her mom hypnotized him last night. He has vague recollections of the evening. The Armitage's wealthy friends start to show up for the big party. It's mostly older white people who say a lot of inappropriate things to Chris, like how he has a good build. Because Tiger Woods golfs, he must have a good swing too. Are black guys better in bed? Etc. Chris sneaks off and finds a blind man named Jim Hudson who says that all the people at the party are ignorant. He's an art dealer and Chris is well aware of who he is. Jim says that he's a fan of Chris's work. He recognizes the irony of a blind art dealer, but tells him that he has a really good assistant who is great at describing pieces. He envies Chris's eye. He himself tried photography, but was never very good at it. Chris goes back to mingling with the guests and discovers another black guy. It's a young guy about his age. Chris tries to bond with him, who is introduced as Logan, the husband of a white woman clearly way older than him, but he too is stiff and unnatural like Walter and Georgina. A sharp eye will notice that this man is Dree from the opening of the movie. There's something about him that seems familiar to Chris though. Chris decides to check in with Rod again. When he returns to his phone, he finds it unplugged again. He plugs it in and calls Rod to tell him everything that's been going on. Rod tells him that white people love to have sex slaves and he needs to get out of there. Rose finds Chris and he tells her how weird everything is and that his phone was unplugged again. She tells him he's just being paranoid because he's in an uncomfortable situation. He agrees and she leaves. Rod tells Chris to take a picture of the black guy and he'll see if he remembers him. As Chris is about to leave, he's blocked by Georgina, who apologizes for unplugging his cellular phone. She was dusting the nightstand and lifted it up. That's when it came unplugged and she didn't want to mess with it further. He says that it's fine and hopes that he didn't mean to snitch on her. She doesn't understand, so he clarifies that he didn't mean to rat on her and get her in trouble. Tattletale, she responds by showing she understands now. She gets super weird and keeps walking closer to him and lets out a single tear while telling him that the Armitages treat her like family. She turns and quickly leaves. Chris goes back outside and tries to discreetly take the familiar black man's picture with his cell phone, but has forgotten to turn off the flash. As soon as his phone flashes, the man changes. He goes from overly prim and proper to raving. His nose starts bleeding and he jumps at Chris, telling him, "Get out. Get the fuck out while you still can." Rose is freaked out now too. She asks her dad what happened and he explains that the flash just caused the man to have a seizure. The man comes out and apologizes for upsetting everyone and says he must return home. Dean says it's time for sparklers and bingo and asks Chris and Rose to join, but Chris would rather go for a walk and Rose joins him. They talk out by the lake and Chris tells her that he's sure he recognizes the guy and that something strange is definitely going on. She agrees. That did not seem like a seizure at all. They talk about his mother's death and how he would never abandon her. Chris says that he'd really like to go home now. Rose reluctantly agrees. She says she'll make up something to tell her parents. Back at the house, a strange quiet bingo game is going on. Dean holds up a number on his fingers and some of the guests hold up cards that show bingos on them already. A slow pan out reveals that Dean is holding an auction with his guests, and next to him is a framed picture of Chris. The bingo cards are the paddles and Dean goes up to 10 fingers. Never verified but assumed to mean $10 million, Jim Hudson has won the auction. Chris and Rose later return to find all the guests go home. Chris goes back to pack his belongings and gets a call from Rod, who tells him that the guy in the picture is a guy they knew who used to work at a movie theater named Dree, but went missing. The phone battery dies. Chris notices the closet door is open. He looks inside and finds a red box filled with photos of Rose posed romantically with many other black guys. And they are not just random black guys. There are photos of her with both Walter and Georgina, who don't look at all like the robotic versions of themselves we've come to know so far. Apparently, Chris isn't the first black guy Rose has been with after all. Rose returns and Chris says that he needs the keys to put their bags in the car. She looks for them in her purse as they make their way out of the house. Suddenly, Jeremy blocks the door. Dean and Missy are there too. Jeremy is ready to attack, but Missy and Dean tell him to calm down. Chris keeps telling Rose to get the keys and she's looking. Missy and Dean don't want Chris to leave. Chris yells at Rose to find the keys again and Rose stops looking scared, looks calm and looks up and says very calmly, "You know I can't give you the keys," and shows him the keys were in her hand the entire time. She's in on whatever this is. Jeremy attacks. Dean yells and Missy clinks his teaspoon on her glass, causing Chris to sink back into the dark void again. As he sinks back into the void, he hears Dean tell Jeremy to grab his legs so they can take him to the basement. You see Rose come into view and tell Chris that he was one of her favorites and blows him a kiss. Rod keeps trying to call Chris, but it keeps going straight to voicemail. He looks up the picture of the guy in the photo and sees that he went missing some time ago, so he goes to the police. He tells a female officer that his boy was kidnapped by white folk to be a sex slave just like the missing guy in the picture. She calls in 2 more officers to listen to Rod's story. When he finishes, they all burst out laughing. No one is going to take him seriously. Chris wakes to find himself tied to a chair in front of a mounted deer head in an old TV. He watches a video made by Dean's father that talks about immortality and stuff like that. The teacup and spoon appear on the screen again, and after a few seconds he gets sent back into the void. Rod tries Chris's phone again and Rose answers. She says that Chris left 2 days ago and is concerned too. He left in a taxi or an Uber maybe. Rod tells her that he went to the police and she seems concerned about this. He starts to realize that something is wrong, so he tries to record the call. When he goes back to talking to her, she tells him she knows that he has the hots for her. He tells her she's a crazy bitch and hangs up. Chris wakes up and Jim Hudson is on the screen. He tells Chris that they're going to swap brains. The other people at the party were all about being black, but Jim couldn't give less of a shit about that. What he really wants is to be able to see the world through Chris's eyes. Dean has perfected the neurosurgery to make this all possible, and Missy hypnotizes the body donors to prep them for the procedure. He'll continue existing in the dark void, but will be able to continue on as sort of a passenger. The flashing is an unfortunate side effect as they saw earlier at the party. Chris sees that his fingernails have clawed through the leather arm of the chair and exposed the padding. Ting 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 of the teaspoon and Chris is out again. Dean and Jeremy prep Jim Hudson for a brain transplant. Dean tells Jeremy to go get Chris. Jeremy goes down the hall. We see now we're in the basement of the house and find Chris unconscious. He takes off his restraints and gets an IV ready. Suddenly, Chris hits Jeremy from behind. Before he can get up, Chris hits him again and knocks him out. Chris wasn't unconscious after all. He stuffed the padding from the chair in his ears to block the sound of the teaspoon. Dean starts calling for Jeremy and goes out of the lab area to check on him. Chris rushes him and impales him with the deer antlers from the other room. He knocks over a candle that ignites the blanket covering Jim Hudson too. Rose has earbuds in and isn't aware any of this is going on. She is listening to I've Had the Time of My Life from Dirty Dancing while looking up NCAA prospects on the internet. Chris goes upstairs and finds Missy. She goes for the teacup and spoon, but Chris beats her to them and smashes them. Instead, she attacks him with a knife, but he turns it on her and stabs her. Chris goes for the front door again, but Jeremy has returned and puts him in a chokehold. Chris breaks free and kills Jeremy too. He runs outside and gets in Jeremy's car. On the passenger seat is the medieval helmet from earlier. He starts to drive away, but accidentally hits Georgina. He can't just let her lay there like his mom did, so he gets her in the car and continues down the driveway. Rose whispers grandma and runs down the steps of the now burning house with the shotgun. This is when you realize that Georgina has the grandmother's brain. She starts to wake up, and in the process, her wig falls off and we see she has a scar across her head from a brain transplant too. She attacks Chris as she's yelling that he has destroyed the family. They crash into a tree and Georgina dies from the impact. Boom, the rearview mirror is blown away. Rose is coming after him with a gun. Chris gets out of the car and starts to run away. Rose shoots again and misses him. From out of nowhere, Walter runs in and tackles Chris with Rose saying, "Get him, Grandpa." During the struggle, Chris grabs his phone and takes a picture that flashes. Walter gets up, nose bleeding like Dre's earlier, and turns to Rose and says, "I'll take care of him." Obviously, this is Rose's grandfather's brain in Walter. She hands him the shotgun, but he shoots Rose in the stomach, then turns it on himself and kills himself. Chris is slowly getting up hurt from the car crash and the attack from Walter. He sees that Rose is still alive and is trying to get the gun. He moves the gun and crawls over on top of her and begins to choke her. She starts saying "I love you" while being choked and starts to grin because he is getting too upset to go through with it. Then the police lights appear on the road. Chris gets off of her and puts his hands up. Rose starts weakly calling out help. The car door opens and is revealed to be a TSA patrol car. It's Rod. Chris gets in the car and Rose finally succumbs to her wounds. After a moment of silence, Rod tells him, "Man, I told you not to go in that house." He asks Rod how did he know where he was. He tells him it is because he works for the TSA, and at TSA they handle shit and tells Chris to consider this handle. Rose slowly dies, just as Chris's mother died, alone lying on a cold road in the middle of the night. They drive off with Chris staring out into the darkness, a reminder of how the camera shot was at the beginning when they were driving to the parents' house.